Hello everyone, myself Karthik, Assistant Professor in Department of Medical Imaging Technology. So I'll be discussing about a topic called functional MRI. The contents that we'll be discussing is all about what are all the basics of functional MRI, and we have to study about different parts of brain. So what are all the areas are brains are there and how it is going to function, and then we have to discuss a concept called BOLD imaging, that is blood oxygen level dependent imaging, then the hemodynamic response of the brain according to the activity that we are going to give. Then we will be studying about the different paradigms and the activity that we are going to give it for a patient. Then we can perform a functional MRI. Then we can see about the clinical applications and the recent innovations in functional MRI. So before, let me go into the topic. So our brain has a fascinating capability of doing a lot of activities. Like for example, in our day-to-day activity, we talk, we listen, we do play games, we do listen to music and a lot of creative work and our day-to-day work, all those things. In every activity that we are going to perform, a single part of a brain is going to be active in that particular time. So if we are talking, if we are listening, certain areas of the brain is going to receive a stimulus and it is going to be active. So this is the slide which explains what are all the different areas of a brains are there. Say for example, if our visual area. So if we take a visual area, the visual area is like the corresponding area of a brain is going to be in the occipital cortex. So likewise, if for example motor activity and for example listening, emotional area. So like this different areas of the brain, there are certain cortex that is going to receive that particular activity and it is going to respond accordingly to that. So some basic things I will like to tell. So if for example if you take a frontal lobe, that is responsible for your thinking, your speaking, your memory and the movement, and parietal lobe is for language and touch. For occipital area is responsible for your vision and the color perception, and temporal lobe is responsible for your hearing, learning and the feelings. Brainstem is responsible for the balance and the breathing and the heart rate and the temperature response. Cerebellum is responsible for the coordination, the balance coordination. So from head to toe, each and every areas is interlinked with neurons, where the signal has to come from the brain and it has to react to those activities. So in functional MRI, that is a technique which we are going to use those activity. How that activity is going to be there depends upon the task that we are going to give it to a patient. So this fMRI is going to detect the subtle alterations in the blood flow in response to the stimuli or actions. So you can see the image. So this is your structural MRI, where in your normal MRI brain you are going to see an image like this, and in fMRI, functional MRI, you are going to see an activity. So which area of a brain is getting active when that particular task is given. So that can be seen in the functional MRI. So we are going to use a technique called BOLD, that is blood oxygen level dependent technique. So this is a standard technique which is used to generate this fMRI images. How? Because when we are giving some activity, so that particular area is going to receive some changes in the blood flow to that particular area. So how far is that change is going to be there? So we are going to calculate that change and we are going to put it into the normal fMRI image with the activity. Say for example, let me give you an example. A person is looking at something, which corresponding area is going to be active is his occipital cortex, that is responsible for his vision. So if a person is seeing something, this particular area will be active. If the patient is not seeing, if the eyes are closed, what is going to happen? The corresponding area, this occipital cortex, this corresponding area, the blood vessels will be very normal. It will be having this oxygenated hemoglobin flowing through the arteries, the blood vessels. Okay, the neurons corresponding to that particular area will be at completely rest, because eyes is not seeing anything, because it will be completely at rest, so that the neurons will not be active. But immediately if I am going to give some task to the patient and the patient is going to look at something, what is going to happen? This neuron is going to get active. It is going to demand for the oxygen. When it is going to demand for oxygen, what is going to happen? This oxygenated hemoglobin, whichever is flowing through the blood vessel, will be taken off by these neurons, because it is going to be under activity. So what is going to happen? This particular time, whenever there is an activity, there is going to be the increase in the deoxyhemoglobin. So oxygenated hemoglobin, because of the activity, it has become a deoxyhemoglobin. So that one I am going to put it into a graph. That is what we will call it as a hemodynamic response. So this hemodynamic response is nothing but, if you take this graph, in my y-axis I am going to see the signal, and in my x-axis corresponding to the time. So whenever I am giving this activity, there is an initial dip because of the deoxyhemoglobin. So initial dip will be there, followed by that the threshold will reach to its maximum level, and finally end of the task it will just saturate. So whenever I am going to give an activity, neural activity, so once the activity is started, suddenly correspondingly there will be a dip, because the oxygenated hemoglobin is replaced by the deoxygenated hemoglobin. So initially after that the activity is over, slowly our blood will receive the oxygenated blood, so that you will be having the oxygenated level more. So that's how the threshold reach its maximum level, and finally it comes down to the saturation. So this particular bold signal is very subtle. If an activity is given to a patient, if a patient is doing a finger tapping once, if they are doing it once, what is going to happen? It is very subtle, which we can't calculate in a very particular time of time. So what we are going to do is, we are going to repeat that particular task in a multiple settings, like for example task, and there will be a complete rest, and there will be a task and there will be a complete rest. So this repetition is going to happen for one particular task in a multiple settings. So what is going to happen? The area corresponding is going to get activated. So that area is plotted in a graph like this, and those blood signal is synchronized with the MR data, and finally it has been like post processed into the format whichever we want. So whatever the requirements for fMRI is, definitely you need a high field strength MRI scanners, high performing gradients unit, and RF coils, accessory hardware. So when I am explaining about this accessory hardwares, whatever is necessary is, you need something called paradigm setup. So this paradigm setup comes up with a lot of accessories for vision, for this motor activity, the joystick control, and you need to have this earphone control whenever the auditory task is given. So this different accessories are like synchronized with something called response pad. This response pad function is to get those activity, and it is going to synchronize it with the MR signal. So once this response pad receives this signal activity, whichever the patient is going to give corresponding to the activity, simultaneously MR acquisition is going to happen. So those data is like going to be synchronized together, and finally we will be getting this fMRI data. So before talking deep into the fMRI, we should need some basic knowledge about what are all the areas of brain. So in fMRI usually they will see Broca's area, Wernicke's area, basal temporal area, and a speech area. So you can see this is a Broca's area, and this is going to be a Wernicke's area. This is your temporal lobe. So this is your auditory cortex, and for language and the motor cortex, this particular area of the frontal lobe will be active. So you can see this is the MR image, like synchronized with the activity. You can see the active areas of brain in the normal MR images. So this is your Wernicke's area, and this is going to be your Broca's area. You can see over here. what are all the paradigms we are going to use, or what are all the paradigms that a patient is going to do a task is called as, like, there are different things like visual paradigm, motor function, speech paradigm, and memory paradigm. In visual paradigm, they will be displaying some object, so like this. So the patient has to like see those object or the picture, and he has to reproduce what he has seen. Then there is a motor function. Motor function is nothing but, if you look at this picture, the patient is made to tap their fingers open and close, and they can use their toes also to open, like flex and extend, they can do. Then speech paradigm, there might be like one letter, say for example if they are giving A, so they have to tell some words related to that particular letter. It's like A means aeroplane, aircraft, something like that. Then memory paradigm. Memory paradigm is nothing but some 5 to 10 pictures they will just display. So once they'll display the picture, suddenly they'll ask a picture of the second picture, fourth picture, fifth picture, like that. So how far he is able to remember things can be done using this memory paradigm. So there is some task called verb generation task. In childhood, or if there is a congenital problem for a kid to not to reproduce that particular word or a letter, so they will be giving this kind of task, how far the brain is capable of doing this verb generation. Say for example, if the patient, if they are giving a word like book, something, a related word is read, TV, watch, ball, throw. So something related word they should be able to reproduce it. And there is something called word pair. So in the joystick controller they can use, say for example train, bus, something related, coffee, tea, something related, but milk and sea is not related. If they have that comprehensive like skill to identify those pair words, and they are going to react it accordingly, then their comprehensive task is monitored. Say for example, this is the graph. So there is going to be a baseline followed by the task activity, and there is going to be a baseline, there is going to be a task activity. So it goes on like this. So for a baseline, what they are going to use is like this kind of checkerboard they are going to use, so that our brain will believe that this is going to be a baseline, a common thing, and followed by the change in the activity. Like once the checkerboard is removed, then they will be displaying this particular picture. So then patient will be reacting according to this picture. Okay, this is a flower, so this is a red color flower, something like that. Then again they will go for this baseline, then again they will be displaying the car, so again checkerboard, and again they will be displaying this books. So this kind of comprehensive task is given to check for the comprehensive skill. So similarly, so this is the particular slide which will explain what are all the other tasks that you can give for a patient to check for the auditory, visual, and the comprehensive skill, and the passive learning, memory, all those things. So this can be like tabulated, and you can alternately you can change the task according to the patient criteria, because all the patients are not going to be educated, all the patients are not going to be well versed in the task that we are going to give. So when this particular task is given, it should be like compatible for all kind of patient, so you can alternatively do that. So when this fMRI is started, so this monitor is going to record the image data, the fMRI image data whichever is acquired from the magnetic resonance imaging. Then the controller over this joystick or the monitor or whatever the response that the patient is going to given is recorded in the response pad. So this response pad and the MR data is synchronized, and finally you will get the output. So technically speaking, we are going to like take down the signals that is going to come from the each particular area. So we should be having a sequence called echoplanar imaging, which is susceptible to MRI. So usually it is a susceptibility weighted image. So what is going to happen is the subtle changes in that particular cortex has to be picked up in a very fast manner, because it is going to be very fast and very in microseconds it is going to happen. So for that we are going to use something called echoplanar imaging. So that is the fastest available scanning method. So that is going to fill your case space in a very fast manner and followed by the reconstruction. So this is the post processing, so where the acquired data is like transferred to a platform called MATLAB, FSL, Brain Voyager and SPM, where those synchronized data and the graphical pattern, the color changes in one particular lobe, another particular lobe is drawn using an ROI, and the comparative graphical changes and the quantification changes can be demonstrated here. So this is a lip pointing, so you can see the activity here. So this is a bilateral leg movement, that is a motor cortex. So this is your motor cortex area, you can see the activity, and this is your Broca's area, and this is a motor cortex again. You can see the graphical pattern, how there is a change in the graph when there is no activity and when there is an activity. So simultaneously comparative to ROI is drawn on the right and the left, and you can do the comparative study. So again, this is going to be the visual cortex activated. So visual is going to be in the occipital area. So whenever the patient is seeing something, this occipital area will be active. So again, you have the Broca's area, you have the vernix area activated. So talking about the clinical application, main thing is it is very much helpful in this brain tumor surgeries or this epilepsy surgery. Whenever the patient is undergoing a brain surgery, if a neurosurgeon needs to know if any motor activity or the speech activity or the language activity is involved in that particular area where he is going to do the surgery. So if he does an fMRI and he comes to know the active areas, he can plan very well whether to remove this particular part or whether this particular area is having this activity, so that he can plan his surgery. So that is in how it is very much helpful in surgeries. And pre-symptomatic diagnosis, so in case of like autism, or it is going to be the early diagnosis, some pathology it is going to develop, so you can pre-symptomatically you can diagnose it very well. Then drug development in industrial purpose, it is going to help, and individualizations of therapies and understanding the functional brain disorders. So a lot of neurosurgical studies or the neuro researches are going on in terms of fMRI, so they can denote a lot of brain disorders in the early stage. So that is how your fMRI is going to be very much helpful. And one more thing is, in case of an infarct, so the salvageability of a tissue and the corresponding activity in that particular area also can be determined by the fMRI, so that the treatment purpose, the treatment is going to be very much efficient in such cases. So this is a case of 19-year-old epilepsy patient. So here you can see the patient left hand finger tapping was unable to do. The patient was unable to do this left hand finger tapping because of the extensive right frontal temporal infarct. So here you can see the infarcted area in MRI. So there is no activity, so that the patient couldn't able to perform. There is one interesting innovations by Dr. Robert J. Zatori. He is a neuroscientist in McGill University. So he studied about this musician's brain function. So when he was experimenting on this, a normal musicians will perform using this cellos and gallows in all the concerts, like kind of stuff. But he made a separate equipment which is compatible for MRI and the using this fiber optics cables and all those things. So he made the patient to lie inside an MRI, and the patient was performing like she was playing this cellos inside the MRI. So what he made for this is, there is one electromusical company, so which helped a lot in making this fiber optic cables and fibers which will be compatible, and the corresponding sensors for the fingers when the patient is changing the chords or the patient is changing the strings in the left hand and the corresponding right hand. So each and everything, the sensors are fixed, and then they have denoted, like experimented by doing an MRI, like while playing this cello inside an MRI. So they have found an activity. So if they are like studying a brain activity of a musician, one thing they can see is multiple areas of brains will be active. So you can see this temporal lobe activation, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and the motor cortex, everything will be active at a time, because he is going to move his hands, motor activity is going to be there, he is going to listen to the sound, and he is going to change accordingly. So comprehensive task is also there, motor cortex is also there, auditory cortex is also activated. So that's how they have found out for a musician, because of this multiple activity whenever he is performing is activated in the brain. And one more thing is, if you take a comparison of a non-musician and a musician, the cortical thickness is also more in the brain of a musician. So that is what the change. Similarly, there are a lot of theories, like a lot of publications have been done on the sports athlete or a professional sport person. If it is going to be there, if an fMRI study is done on them, they are going to like find out how far this brain is going to function simultaneously whenever there is a vigorous or aggressive sports activity. And there is also one more studies have been done in gaming. So this kind of action video gaming, so action video gaming is like vigorous fighting and killing is going to be there in that game. So whenever it is going to be there, what one changes they have noted is there are a lot of behavioral effects, and the visual cortex and the verbal cognitive skills. And one more main important thing which I want to say is, in this kind of action video gamers, this emotional area, this amygdala, so this particular area is not much active in this kind of gamers also have been found out using this functional MRI study. So this is how still this fMRI is still evolving, and lot of innovative things are coming up in fMRI. So this artificial intelligence and the recent innovations, one should have an idea about the basics of fMRI, the performance of fMRI, and as well as the innovations of fMRI, so that in future a lot of innovative things can come up in MRI. Thank you.